A lot of my friends are getting married into business families, right?
Sure.
So when there is a guy who's running a business family, the parents come to me कि यार आप बताओ what is the standing of this company.
So that's what I would love to double click a little bit on
Okay.
in terms of the segmentation, the personalization lenses on all of these communications.
Sure.
What happens?
For example, iPhone 15 launch happened. So we know someone who has maybe purchased a 12 or a 13 is likelier to move to a 15 than someone who has purchased a 14.
Sure.
DailyObjects started in 2012, right? Entered into the market selling phone cases and a lot of other tech products. Over the years, they developed the insight into understanding what is it that they want to sell, what is it that they want to sort of represent and be known for. So, to sum it up in just one line, we are essentially solving for and building for modern lifestyle.
Pranil Shah has a very interesting backstory. He's a CA gold medalist who's now running a growth and marketing charter for a company called DailyObjects, which is scaling to a 200 crore annual revenue, largely contributed by the D2C play. Pranil also has a VC background and also has a founder background. So his story is a ton of insights around how to make choices when you're a founder and you're thinking about next steps in your career. And also a ton of work around how insights from consumer data and intuitive conversation with consumers translate into product strategies, which can give you an amazing lifetime value. DailyObjects is in a category which is about aspirational lifestyle but accessible designer stuff, which then means in a user's life, on an everyday basis, they have some 15 occasions to service. So this is one of the best businesses which I would see very, very clear headway to about 1,000 crore company in the next few years. Let's hear him out. So Pranil, the most obvious question, the journey from being the guy who understands money and financial accounting, who got a whole bunch of good scores and a gold medal while doing his CA, how do you end up in marketing?
So, I mean, a part of that reason is probably, like as arrogant as it is to say it's in my blood, right? Our entire family is sort of, filled with CAs and numbers. So numbers have been at the core of my heart. Having said that, the journey has been quite non-linear and interesting. I haven't ever been able to, sort of resonate with the idea of, working in a conventional job, pursuing the 9 to 5, whatever. It had to be something bigger. So while I completed my CA in November 2016, I joined, like the first thing that I did, like that a CA typically does is, join a big four, right? So I joined one of the big fours, worked in their audit department for about a year. And that's when I realized that this is definitely not for me. And then I moved into a project financing setup, which essentially analyzes, big township projects, right? Like when you have, like, say, a Supertech or a Unitech launching a project or a hospitality segment, they need like a lot of funding from different banks, right? 200 crore, 300 crore, 1,000 crore. So we as lenders, engineers is what they call it. They analyze the project, whether it's, viable or not, whether it will repay the cash flow or not, right? So that is the first instinct where I sort of got induced into understanding what makes a business work. Who needs that funding? Who will get that funding? Who deserves that funding? That sort of developing a knack for what is money being used for and going deep into, analyzing the companies, ripping their financials off and understanding in depth, right, beyond what the financials project, what are the software elements of, a viability of a project and a company. From there on, I moved into a venture capital setup, which is where my love for startups started. In parallel, I was also doing my own startup because of that, starting thought that have to do something, build something of my own. So I would go into my, like 9 to 7 job, and then at the evening, I would come back, pack orders, set up marketing campaigns, and just like study more. That was about 2017 to 2019. Just did that, and like the company that I was working with, the VC firm, was mostly into sustainable energy companies. So sustainable energy, while it was a very core to some of the values that I represent, it was mainly smaller companies needing a lot of cash flow, and the conventional banks don't really understand that. So the bridge financing aspect and the venture financing aspect sort of plays into this. My team was extremely smart, Silicon Valley aces, being guided by those guys into, going deeper into, the promoters. Who are they marrying? Who are they partnering with? How old is the family setup? Where is the money coming from? What is white? What is black, right? So all of those software elements, because, financial can tell you an X amount of thing. You can calculate on theory. What are these ratios? Is it looking good? Is it looking bad? But, when it comes to venture financing and the startup ecosystem, you have to go beyond, right? You have to take a call on the person who's running the company. You have to take a call on the team, right? These software aspects is what I essentially learned there. And I realized that, this makes me want to do my own thing even further, which was going on in parallel for almost like 10, 12 months. And, that's when in September 2019, I quit and I started my own, like it was already there, but I sort of,
Sure.
went full into it.
Yeah.
So it was fairly new to me, coming from a finance background, understanding marketing, understanding SEO, understanding communication, understanding social media. None of it came naturally to me, but there was a drive to sort of figure it out. And like I love tech personally. I have always been very close to tech. So coding the entire website by myself, getting the network to help me out every now and then, and setting up like a decently solid setup to sort of scale. And then Amazon happened, Flipkart happened. I set up my own portal, scaled it to a pretty decent level. In parallel, had a couple of other startups, which, we can skip for now, in the pet space, in the lighting space. But yeah, the one setup that I had was in pop culture gifting merchandise. So pop culture also came naturally to me. This is Jolmal. So that was the setup that we, sort of I scaled with, like building a small team.
Pretty much a one-man army, right? I mean, from coding the website to marketing it and doing the SEO to it and the shipping and the packaging and everything put together.
Absolutely. So when it started out, it had to be a one-man army, right? Because did not understand a lot about building the team, did not have the resources very early on. But business was growing really fast, like beyond a scale that I could handle by myself. So team building also happened quite fast. And, like, at a small startup, teams are very close-knit, right? So people handle a lot of things, very erratically and very sporadically. Ironically, one of the persons who was hired at Jholmal as a very base level blue collar operations person is someone who is working at DailyObjects as well, now in the design team, right? Because there was a lot of focus, you learn about design, you learn about Photoshop. Of course, he's at a very basic, sort of position, but like from where he was back at his hometown in Madhya Pradesh to coming here, living in a metro city and like earning 4, 5, 7x as much as he was. I think these are the things that sort of, a part of, the startup culture, which sort of excites me, right? The learning, the growth, the randomness, right? Anything can happen. Anyone can do anything, which is sort of, knit back into the CA moving into a marketing or a growth domain, right? And I think, that was the approach even at Jholmal. So I scaled that to a pretty decent level, just like hustling through and through. And then COVID hit, and a lot of the stuff that we were doing was essentially curating stuff that you wouldn't have seen elsewhere in India, right?
Sure.
When COVID hit, a lot of the supply chains with these Southeast Asian manufacturers got a little disrupted. And, that sort of, made us rely more on bigger importers who were like, importing products in bulk rather than directly procuring. And these guys would send products to, say, 20 other such suppliers.
Sure.
So the uniqueness factor, which sort of was, say, 85-90% unique, sort of fell down to maybe a 15-20%. And while it was still profitable at that scale, I thought to myself, like, this is decent money for now and this is decent growth for now. But like, what about 2 years later, 3 years later? Competition is increasing every now and then. You have to have a brand vision, right? Like without a vision, a company is bound to fail. And I wasn't sure of the vision that I initially set out with. And while it was profitable, brand loyalties, again, is something which is very hard these days, right?
Sure.
Earlier, it used to be more about, good brands, some average brands, and then a lower set of brands. So if you're very money conscious, you will just go with the cheapest option possible. And if you have that capacity, you will go with the best option possible.
Sure.
So it was a fairly black and white choice, I feel. Now, moving, say, 7-8 years from back then, it's a lot of good brands out there. A lot of good brands, great products, and great storytelling. So I feel brand loyalties these days is very hard to maintain, right? Because the choice is even more complicated. And with the amount of marketing and with the amount of, channels that people are pushing their products across, the user can't help but get influenced, right? They may hate ads, but you are going to see ads. It's just about whether you are seeing A ad or B ad, right? So you are going to see ads. Facebook asks you, is this ad relevant? If you say no, they will show you some other ad, but you will see that ad, right? So in the era of like constantly being pushed a lot of content, brand loyalties are low. So I personally feel, other than maybe say cosmetics where your skin is involved, maybe apparels to some extent, there is very little brand loyalty.
Or Apple.
Right? Or Apple, right? Or Apple.
Sure.
Right? So how do you sort of capture an audience which wants to come back, right? And that is not something that I felt that Jolmal was doing at that time, which is why I decided to scale it down. And then the question came, okay, what next? Ironically, back in December 2021, yeah, that is when I just like woke up hungover one day and I decided, okay, let's just see what's out there and let's just like speak to founders and people. And randomly, I just like shot my resume at DailyObjects. This was, I think, 26th December, because I remember it was a Christmas party. 26th December, I was there. I spoke to the head of growth who was there back then and had a really interesting conversation. Just went with no expectations in mind, right? Was still a little averse to the idea of working in a setup, but the conversation I had with that guy was quite enlightening. And I realized that, this is a setup where there's a lot of creativity. There is, enough chaos for me to be excited, but not too much structure for me to be repelled. And there is openness in, what these guys want to achieve and the kind of roles that these guys want, right? And within 3 days, I had conversations with the head of growth and the two founders, and like it just seemed a naturally fit conversation.
Yeah.
Right? These guys were looking at exactly what I was doing, right? So I had tons of ideas at Jolma that I wanted to execute, but I couldn't execute them to that scale, or maybe there was a resource constraint, but which wasn't there in this case, right? So I'm like, this seems like a perfect
playground, right?
Perfect playground. And within like I think my like 26th December was the first interview, and 4th January I joined these guys. So it was that fast.
Great start to the new year.
Yeah, great start to the new year, and I was still a little wary on what this essentially entails, right? Handling something which is 50, 100 times bigger than you.
Step back for a moment and ask you, did you evaluate the company's financials and the founders, whatever choices they were making because you were betting your next few years of your career on this? What all did you evaluate?
100%, right? So, this is something that I have been doing across different elements of my life, right? Whether it comes to investing in a personal finance capacity. A very, very random example of this is, a lot of my friends are getting married into business families, right?
Sure.
So when, there is a guy who's running a business family, the parents come to me, ki yaar, aap batao, what is the standing of this company? And this may not be relevant at all.
So you can probably skip it's about how do you make decisions and choices in life.
Right. So, judging, because, a lot of things seem very basic, like there's a lot of show and tell when it comes to certain business people, right? You can see a certain thing and then you make an impression, but when you dig deeper into the financials, you can tell how big the team is. So I would tell my friends, okay, this is the likely size of their team, this is the kind of level that these guys are doing, this is the complexity in the different transactions.
Trust me, you'll have a lot of takers who might be not relevant for this conversation, but this is an interesting,
absolutely.
It's a service proposition.
No,
right?
actually, I figured out that there is a huge gap, and there is actually a profile which, there is a need for these, right? Like especially in business marriages or in Baniya, Marwadi, Gujarati marriages, this is actually a gap. But anyway, like moving back to the track.
Life choices and careers.
Yeah, moving back to the track, like before DailyObjects, I did dig deep into their financials, right? And
it was like all of 7 days from 26th December to 4th January pretty much. And I'm hoping you did have your New Year party regardless.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, I mean, before the interview and like even during the discussions I was having with both the founders, these were some of the questions that I sort of, interacted with.
So you asked them the hard questions and
I did. I think it's very important to be blunt and straightforward. And like, this is the expectation that they would have from me, right? That this person knows their numbers, right?
Fair enough.
If I don't question them, I cannot question a third party on behalf of DailyObjects. So now I do that, right? When it comes to projects. But yeah, going back to that conversation, like, there was a certain financial track record of the company and there was a lot of growth and there were certain questions.
And they were open-minded about sharing all of this with somebody who's like, you're a candidate for a job. Why exactly are you asking all these questions? And that's okay.
Honestly, not really. I think it flew quite naturally.
Yeah.
And, they were quite open about it.
I mean,
right?
Of course, you were also a founder till like a month ago. So obviously that respect is mutual in some sense.
Precisely. So, I mean, I think the CA knack is what gets people's attention. And then the conversation is where they sort of realize that it's a lot more, or it's a lot, not just the numbers part of it, right? It's a lot of insight into sort of understanding the whys of anything pretty much, right? So
When you
you
said the
know,
whys, is that numbers at the root of everything? Is that the lens, or
it could be, right?
Yeah.
There at times it is numbers, at times it's the qualitative aspects.
Sure.
So there were a lot of questions on the growth of the company, on how the company has evolved, what can be done better, what can't be, right? Like, and um, not just about asking them the hard questions, but it was also about offering suggestions on this is what a gap from a third lens perspective is, right? So do you also acknowledge this gap? Are you aware of this gap? And what are you doing to address this gap? If nothing, then how can I help you sort of fix this gap?
So in some sense, you're like filling up a gap in what their currently play looks like, and they already acknowledge it. Perfect playground. You get your resources, and it's time to roll.
Right. So when you sort of analyze a company, you will find, say, it's very easy to criticize, right? So you will find 10 gaps, and you will be like, these are 10 gaps. So in a lot of cases, most of the gaps are known. For some, activities are happening, and for some others, things are not happening for a reason, right? So understanding and empathizing with the whys is sort of what you figure out when you have these conversations with people, right? And not just within Daily Objects, even the conversations I have with different founders or different people in the network, marketing specialists or growth specialists, on the problems that these guys are facing. So it's easy to criticize, this is so basic, why are you not doing this, right? This is like boilerplate. But when you sort of understand and empathize with the situation, with the entire 20 different angles, that is when you develop that perspective. Okay, this is why this is not happening, right? It could be monetary restraint, it could be team restraint, it could be, say, a branding angle, right? Anything can happen. So understanding all of those things is very critical to understand.
So while this is not normally the agenda of this conversation, but now that we're here, I'm curious in terms of, there'll be tons of founders who are considering their next check. It's all right, things happen. But any specific word of advice on how to choose carefully, because you made a great choice somehow. Whatever homework you did seems to have worked out well, because you've had a great stint and the company's had a great journey. This couldn't have been anticipated in advance. Maybe some of it could have been because of the nature of questions and the answers you got. So any, let's say, specific tips on founders looking to figure their next step?
Sure. So it wasn't, I think it wasn't very black and white to start off with, of course. Didn't even expect it to be black and white. It was mostly about, there's a skill set, right? I think knowing what your core skill set is, whether you are a successfully exited founder or you are someone who has scaled down your startup, you need to know what you are good at, what your skill set is, and what excites you. And then you need to figure out what are the brands which have a certain problem statement, right? You figure out the sync between the problem statement and the skill set. And then look at brands where that problem statement is, being solved by your skill set. I think at the very basic, that is about it.
Sounds fairly intuitive and logical, but I'm assuming there's a degree of hindsight to it because you spent a certain amount of time evolving and getting to this conclusion.
Absolutely. So, I mean, there are a lot of softer aspects on what do you want from your life, right? And this will probably go a little bit spiritual that way, right? Like if you are very early on and you have a higher risk-taking capacity, although I feel as an entrepreneur that, you can, like, the right time is now, right? You're never too young, never too old for anything. But there may be a lot of external factors that you are sort of considering. So when it comes to judging a company, I think the founding team is very, very critical, right? Who are you going to be led by? Who are your founders? What is their vision? Do they have a solid vision? Do they have a bigger term, longer term vision, right? Or is it just about कि जो चल रहा है वो चलते रहने दो, बिक रहा है बेचते रहो, right? And typical धंधा वाला जो होता है, जो मतलब like a Chandni Chowk market for lack of better examples, right? कि they are happy with what they are doing and they are making their money and they are like
somewhere complacent.
Somewhere
you don't
complacent,
want people who are complacent.
Right? I think like for me personally, it is a lot about working with hustlers. It is a lot about people wanting to overshoot, right, their targets and have bigger ambitions, whether or not you achieve big or not, but your thinking has to be big.
Ambition wise.
Again, I think personally for me, one thing that I as well looked for was the funding that the company has, right? I have worked in a 0 to 1 and 1 to 10 sort of a setup, right? Like I know the challenges that comes with bootstrapping a business, and there is a certain time. If you have that time, sure, go work with a company and bet big on a very, very small setup where you may not essentially get paid enough initially, and then it may pay off or may not pay off, right?
Risk versus reward, of course.
Yeah. For me, even like, and this question ties back to my thought as well when I was planning to scale down Jhoolmaal. Should I get investors? Because there were a lot of conversations happening with a couple of folks because it was profitable and growing, gifting space is increasing. I just did not want that pressure of investors without a clear brand vision, right? And that is where I decided that, if that is my angle and if I don't want that, then maybe the company has to have a certain specific level of cash flows, right? So understanding the cash flows, understanding the inventory management, understanding those basic ratios which tell you that a company has that necessary money to at least feed you for the next 1 year, 2 years, whatever, is something that, you have to look at.
Fair
So
enough.
and then of course the growth opportunities, right? So money, growth, and then the founders, like the founding team. I think these were like three of the most critical things that I was judging at. Ki,
Awesome.
is this
So now you're the
sustainable?
growth guy at DailyObjects.
Yeah.
What does life look like in the first quarter?
So like while on paper growth profiles are supposed to be about making these plans and strategies and growing forward, executing big shot ideas, I think a major part of my role is just firefighting.
Is or was or still remains?
I think it still remains and it is going to be that way, right? And even when you look at our founder, he is constantly fighting fires, right? Most of even my time just goes in, strategizing. Between Pankaj and I, we keep on strategizing, having these brainstorming sessions and networking, right? At that stage, I mean, Pankaj is networking way more than I am. But at my stage, it's a lot about strategizing with him.
When you say networking, this is about investors, suppliers, customers,
both, everything, right? Like from a bigger lens, right?
Sure.
And which is why the middle management layer is there to sort of facilitate the idea that say either of the founder is having, and then sort of translating that into operations, and then the entire team is sort of executing.
So the execution engine has to be like fairly functional to keep it agile and effective.
Absolutely.
The lens I'm trying to apply to this is from a startup founder's lens. When is a good time to get a growth team together, and how should they kind of build scale and stability and process around that? Because that's a choice that people sometimes postpone. Sometimes it's too early, sometimes it's too late.
Yeah.
So in your impression from the way you entered and you played this out, what was, let's say, the whole org lens to that? Okay, now we're ready to handle a head of growth who will have this charter or things like that.
Sure. So I think my personal opinion on this, and I'm not sure how Pankaj would have thought when he got me. Of course, the team had to be built in, but what I feel is that as long as a founder someone who is growing, right, like a company, they need to know everything about everything, right? Or at least till a certain point of time. So there is a certain period of time where the founder himself or herself is doing all of those activities. To the extent that they can do those activities, I think that is where it should sort of stretch out. To the extent that they feel that there are like the cost of their hour is worth more spending somewhere else. I think that is the pivotal point where they should hire someone in growth. And again, that is very critical because you may have resource constraints and you may have a skill set constraint. But I think earlier the better as compared to later. But yeah, like founders need to spend time into bigger things and bigger growth plans and
strategizing. Was the sole
strategizing.
acquisition, that's where the money gets spent. So pretty much the paid media led kind of plays, right?
Yeah.
So from that lens, it could be a skill gap as well as the level of attention the subject needs and the kind of mindshare that it deserves. So somewhere the founder has to take that stance. Okay, I'm not able to do justice to this anymore. Let me bring somebody. At the same time, from a cost lens, it's not necessarily a simple answer because a good guy will not be the cheapest guy.
Absolutely.
And if you have to build the team a little top down, was that the lens here?
So I think, it was to sort of, make more structure build more structure into the company, because, it's like at a startup, especially with us, it's a fairly flat structure, right?
Sure.
While there are hierarchies, defined hierarchies.
Somewhere get the slightly senior guy or smarter guy or bigger guy or more expensive guy first, and then let him build this out. Or you say that, okay, I'm gonna make do with a couple of these junior guys, and then it's the right time I'll bring in somebody senior, because the appetite and the mindset to invest sometimes is also in question.
Yeah, so I mean, which is a problem that I think most founders are facing these days, because the intent to get good people at the right price is always there. But a lot of times what you actually want them to do is not really clear. So for a lot of these founders, it's essentially a bet you take on that person, right? So even when I joined, or the person before me, the head of growth joined, I think it was a lot about, there are a lot of problems. We are not sure which bucket does this problem fit in, but can you help us solve most of these problems? Right? And then once you sort of solve these problems, you realize, okay, this is more towards this one person's department, and these problems are more linked to, say, a design team. These persons are more linked to a marketing and growth team. And then the next person, when that person moves out, that is when you know, okay, this is the hierarchy, this is the structure that we need to follow. So it's a lot of, trying out a lot, building those roles a lot.
No, in some sense, it's also about the kind of guys you're getting in are slightly fluid in terms of the different things that they can pick up, right? Because you've pretty much been a one-man army in your previous place, which means if you were to solve problems across any part of the organization, you could do that. But I don't know if the supply of this kind is very common, because most people who will come in, if they were to try and build a team, they would be coming in from somewhere they've done something specific, which is slightly narrow, slightly more vertical. So from that lens, is that a fair filter, or would you recommend that filter to be applied, that this guy has to be a multifaceted guy if he's your first growth hire?
So I think you can't answer that very plainly.
Universally, sure.
Yeah, universally. I think it's a lot of luck, right? It's no, not. I think
the whole element of luck, right? To the extent, at least from a people side, to the extent you can prevent that luck element, you would want to.
You would, right? But when you are sort of running that startup, which is, say, at least from a DailyObjects perspective, right? Like, let's just change the perspective from mine to, say, my founder and the companies, right? The company is growing 2x, 2x, 2x in the past couple of years.
Yearly 2x.
Yearly 2x, right? Year on year. You are building the team. You are realizing that, you have figured out your vision and you are sort of doing good things. Things are growing. You are getting that traction. What is that next pivotal point? How do you do that? Is a next pivotal point coming from the design side? Is it going to come from operations side? Is it going to come from, say, a marketing or a growth side? You don't necessarily have the exact answers, but you have an intuitive sense, right? Sure. And I feel as a founder's perspective, their intuitive sense is the strongest, right? So even when I discuss this with Pankaj, like, it's our decision making for a lot of things is very simple, right? He tells me that if the answer is a maybe, or if you're not sure, it's a no, right? So a lot of things, like how he has helped me sort of build up within myself is building that intuitive sense, and that, of course, there's a lot of data driven approach, right? The data is at the core of it, but a lot of those final calls you're just not able to take. So those intuitive senses are where sort of, decisions get made. And again, I understand that, this is not answering your question as candidly as you expect, because, there is a bit of subjectivity. But yeah, I think, at the right stage, someone who, you don't have to be skilled in 10 different things, right? But you have to empathize with each of the teams.
In some sense, you're prepared to hustle.
Yeah. So, for example, the tech team would tell me that, this is not possible from a tech perspective. The design team will tell me ki, this is the UI we have developed, something very fancy, and this is what we need to get out. And the tech will say this is not happening, right? So, how do you bring those teams together? How do you sort of tell them, okay, this is their side, this is their side, because the design won't understand tech won't understand design. So you need someone to facilitate, whether, they may not understand the complete design or complete tech, but you need to tell them and sort of, collaborate with them in a way that they understand this is a good enough level, right? You have to meet this middle ground and facilitating those themes, managing those projects, right? I think that is essentially what I try to do. Right. And that kind of a role I feel is very critical. I don't understand the most about design or like in depth about tech, right? But I know enough to sort of bring, my tech leads or my design leads together to tell them, okay, this is the problem. You both have to, or, all three of us have to sort of, understand how a good enough solution needs to come, and then optimization will happen over a period of time. So it's about getting things executed, right? Ideas are great. It's great to have like top-notch ideas, but you have to start somewhere. So it's more about getting things executed and then optimizing, rather than just like living in an extreme idealistic situation and never getting things done.
Fair.
So I think that has...
I could do the backward math on it because your current scale in 2x, 2x, 2x backwards, but when you entered, what was the nature of scale?
So I think when I had just entered was about January of last year, right? So almost 2 years into it. On our website, we were doing about 1.92 crores of revenue per month. And now we are almost doing 5.5-6 crores per month. And of course, this is just on the platform and apps. There is marketplaces and corporate is also picking up in parallel force, right? So even that has grown 2x. So, of course, a lot of the growth is being led by the own platform, right? Almost 65% of our sales is contributed by our platform and apps, as against a lot of players where, they are marketplaces or Amazon first.
And that's the nature of the, that's where I'm going to get to the brand and the proposition, the loyalty in this segment. And, what's this whole story about DailyObjects?
Sure. So I think DailyObjects started in 2012, right? Entered into the market selling phone cases and a lot of other tech products. Over the years, they developed the insight into understanding what is it that they want to sell, what is it that they want to sort of represent and be known for. So, to sum it up in just one line, we are essentially solving for and building for modern lifestyle. So, modern lifestyle
It's a fairly wide
encapsulates
canvas to do stuff.
everything, which is what ties back to the name as well, right? Daily objects. You can have pretty much anything as a daily objects. But what, sort of narrowing down into it, we sort of think that daily objects, we sort of want daily objects to be present at the intersection of tech and lifestyle, right? So you have products which are not only functional, but they are also good looking. There is a certain design sense behind it. There is a certain storyline. And that flows not just into our user segmentation or a product segmentation, but into every smaller thing. Say the choice of raw material that we are using, the color palette that we are using, right? There are tons of greens that you will find in the market, but the greens that you will see on our website would be things that you may not have seen elsewhere, right?
Sure.
So a lot of research goes into it, a lot of sort of, insight goes into it, a lot of study goes into it. And this is why the design consciousness sort of is something that resonates to our audience, right? People go in for the look of it and for the functionality of it. So when you look at players, there are either the cheaper alternatives that you will get on Amazon, which are like extremely lower price and you will get them for $300-500, whatever, or you have those very premium brands which are say 20-25K plus. So in India, there is no specific brand per se, right, who's delivering that quality and that premiumness with a design and functionality focus, right? So this is our gap that we have identified, that
lifestyle,
mass
aspirational,
premium.
Slightly mass premium. That's
mass premium is essentially where we try to shine.
And which is a fairly fast-growing segment, and that's a sort of sweet spot in some sense. And the kind of, let's say, portfolio you're carrying, there's absolutely amazing room for great lifetime value.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right? I mean, for people who resonate with this, who like something they purchase, are bound to come back for more.
Absolutely.
And that reminds me of the 49% annual repeat rate that you just spoke to us about. Let's just zoom into this a little bit in terms of where you were back then, in terms of the whole infra around retention, or at least watching retention for all I know, and how the product catalog has evolved, how the business and the customer engagement has evolved to now make it, let's say, a much higher lifetime value in a very consistent, profitable fashion. Because I'm assuming you're watching your ROASes and they have to be maintained healthy.
Absolutely.
So I'm not going to delve too far into it. We've had that conversation before. But just the lens on consumer engagement depth and the product portfolio expansion to keep this relationship going with your core segment of audience.
Sure. So I think from a product perspective, instead of expanding, I think we have sort of, narrowed it down to make it more focused. So it used to be a lot of, when it started, it used to be a lot about phone cases and tech accessories. And then, I think just about 3 years back is when we launched our first designer bags collection. And, it was essentially made of canvas and like very high functionality and very, out there for the younger mindset. And that was our first foray into designer goods. And we realized that, it's been going insanely well, really fast. And that is when we sort of, started moving more into the designer goods category, which is your bags, your wallets, your backpacks, your tote bags, your sling bags, your fanny packs, right? Because these are essentially daily use items, right? Especially for our younger audiences, which is our core. These products resonate a lot. So having that pivotal shift from just say 80-90% tech accessories to now a very healthy mix between tech accessories, wireless solutions, desk accessories, and these lifestyle designer goods. It's equally divided.
The portfolio is kind of substantially more non-tech as well in some sense.
So so non-tech as well. So from a tech to a design is the leap that we sort of consciously took.
But in some sense, what I'd love to understand a little better, when you made these shifts, was this about expanding the TAM or the use cases or the occasions in the same user's life? What was the lens while getting into these things? So this is like an opportunity you've identified and you have to be expanding in that direction. What was the lens?
So I don't think it was more about just the TAM thing. It was more about building an ecosystem which makes sense, right? So in a daily objects setup, right? If we are trying to solve for modern lifestyle, what are we trying to solve, right? So the user is at the is at the front, right? So what encapsulates, what are the elements that encapsulate a user's daily routine, right? So a user is going to carry their cell phone. A user is going to
using in the FMCG world is occasions, right? That's
right.
What
these occasions, right? So what is it that comprises the day-to-day of our audience, right? So trying to understand that. So, when we looked at that lens, right, either it's office or it's, college-going students or it's office-going people. Mostly we are looking at professionals, but the younger audience as well. But in a day-to-day life, you are hustling, you are moving out, you are connected with tech. So solving for that tech and the accessories that support that tech or built around that tech, right? So our laptop sleeves, our bags, they're very functional. So they will support your laptop, they will support your other accessories. There are solutions for charging cases.
But am I buying this for the functionality of it, or there's a blend of the what it says about me in some sense as a statement piece, right? Because you're making design a lot more democratized in some sense. You have a fancy designer, but that stuff is not as premium. So it's accessible for me if I want to make a statement about what I'm carrying. Is that a fair lens to apply?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are looking at bringing good design at an affordable price. Right.
So as a consumer who's part of your core audience, I will end up having these 20 different occasions in my day. And at this point, from your portfolio lens, you're covering, let's say, maybe 5 of them. And the direction to move in would pretty much be to cover the remaining 15 and then discover the next bunch as well.
Absolutely.
But what's very interesting is, and kind of unique to your business, is the number of occasions you can capture with the same brand positioning and the same audience segment is quite insane, which is probably what's reflecting in the lens on lifetime value and repeats. So help us understand this whole user journey in your ecosystem a little better, because you'll have various kinds of campaigns on the acquisition side running, acquire people at different entry points in terms of product categories or life stages, and then they evolve into consuming more. So what's typically the entry point? What's typically the journey? Have you discovered something that works well as an acquisition category versus a repeat and cross-sell category? What's been your discovery there?
Sure. So, it's fairly category agnostic, I would say. People, when we try to look at data and analyze patterns, right? So the portfolio, when it was more sort of skewed towards the tech accessories, of course, tech accessories were selling more.
Sure.
Right. But now it's fairly divided.
And zoom into the first order side of things. When you acquire new customers, where do they come from?
So mostly we are acquiring customers through social media, right? Of course, that's a given for most D2C brands, and that is where we are sort of getting our first set of customers. People are buying things across, right? There is no specific
so it's a fair product mix in terms of what's getting bought. But in terms of your acquisition spends, is there an allocation towards I'll do more for bags and less for this or this, anything of that nature?
Not particularly.
Not
particularly, because I mean, of course, there are certain stellar products and stellar collections that we want to focus more on, which are more design forward, say an artist-led collection or a collection where we have invested a lot of time. But we have tons of SKUs across our catalog. So we want to focus more on the premium ones and, scale down the ones which are sort of, old. So originality and innovation is something which is very core to our product process.
So the catalog kind of recycles in terms of being completely fresh catalogs every 3 months or whatever?
Yeah, I think, So when I talk about, new launches, so to speak, or category refresh, so every month we are doing at least 2 artist collaborations who mostly design phone cases.
But there's not expansion, there's a degree of replacement involved because you will kill some things to make this.
So killing happens slower and addition happens faster. And then there are, every year at least 2 major bags collection is what we are doing. So this year we launched Pangea collection, which is made out of 100% recycled plastic bottles. So that has been going really great. And, there are these stellar tech products which are sort of one-off in nature, and then regularly we keep on sort of adding smaller products, say pouches or small bags within the collection.
So consumers are coming into the brand DailyObjects via multiple entry points. They could have come in with a phone accessory, maybe they could have come with a tech, or maybe they could have come with a handbag, any of these categories. And from a life cycle lens, what's the degree of understanding that, okay, if he's coming through this path, this is where he's likely going to go, and this is my next best offer to him, because automatically if you're able to, let's say, make the guy, the word I hear in D2C world is the glue frequency, right? Once he's bought 4 times, chances he'll buy again is like 80-90%. But to get the first 4 transactions often becomes a challenge because people will drop off from the first to the second in a very, very steep way. So from your lens, given that your year level repeat is pretty amazing, I would imagine there'll be a ton of first to second kind of repeats, right?
So, like the data that we actually know for sure is that, when a person is purchasing, say, an X amount, the second purchase is typically higher. So people are moving upwards, right? So it's not that someone has purchased a bag and then they're moving to phone case. If someone has purchased a bag, say, for 2,000, they are likelier to move to a more premium bag, say, at 3,000.
Are you also super conscious of your acquisition being, let's say, transaction 1 level itself profitable? I mean, you'll cap your ROAS at a level where it doesn't become a lossy transaction on the first one.
No, I think from the first transaction, from the CAC to LTV ratio, from the CAC level, at first it has to be profitable and CAC to LTV has to be even higher.
The moment you're profitable in the first order, the rest of it is all bonus, right? In some sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a lot of the stickiness comes through building these affiliate networks, right? which contributes a significant part of our
So
portfolio.
affiliate, is this the influencers on Instagram, or what kind of affiliates are we talking about?
So both, right? Affiliates, like the primary affiliates that I'm talking about are not influencer related, but they are more towards these channels, these websites. There are affiliate programs that we have built for YouTube influencers. So for us, it's a fairly distinct, differentiation between an influencer who's on an affiliate basis and an influencer who's from a branding perspective.
Sure.
And we do
you
both.
made that distinction very clear.
Yeah, we have made
There's
that.
a ton of confusion around this, how to deal with influencers better, where do you cap out in terms of the impact expected, because there's some amount of brand top of the funnel play, and then there's some amount of very transactional bottom of the funnel play.
Yeah, so I think influencer and attribution of influencers is a very key challenge for most D2Cs.
Most brands.
I think for a lot of it, we have figured out what we want to do and how we want to do it, right?
I think the category is quite influencer friendly, right?
It is very influencer friendly.
I would imagine if you were to start running that Chinese style live commerce stuff, you will end up having stuff flying off the shelves.
Yeah. So the good thing about us is that, people, content creators, right? Not calling them influencers, but content creators are sort of, unnaturally inclined towards our products. So more than us reaching out to influencers and say paying or either agreeing on a barter or whatever, people are already endorsing the brand, right? So every day we are getting like at least 15, 20 people who have tagged us and created content that we anyway love. Right. Sure. So we don't really necessarily have to and this is not say 2 years or 3 years back, but it has sort of picked up with
sort of a testament to your portfolio and its appeal to the audience.
It's a testament to our portfolio, right? So this sort of helps us understand what is working better for us, what is the direction where to sort of slightly pivot even more, what
organic
is to focus
growth
on.
loop automatically in motion.
Yeah. And then on the, when we pay, we make sure that we are getting our buck out of it, right? So the affiliate influencer program sort of works out that way. And we have realized that for us, YouTube works a lot better when it comes to monitoring conversions and the actual conversions, right? So
but is that straight clickstream based conversion, or is there another lens to it?
So I mean, it's essentially we are using a lot of attribution mechanisms to figure out who is getting what revenue. There's a probabilistic model where we are analyzing traffic. Then we are looking at the net increase in sales compared to say a week's average, and then sort of building that model where we know okay, this is the influencer who actually contributed, whether or not GA attributes it or not, or whether or not our pixel sort of.
There's a meaningful level of sophistication in this data setup. Is there a tech stack that you kind of employed for this, or is this all built in-house with whatever data?
No, so I mean, it is a tech stack built on in-house team resources, right? So I think, stepping back a little onto the retention piece, right? When you asked me about the journey, I think one of the most critical pivotal points was to build our own app. And that piece has been very instrumental in us building and increasing our retention rate. And also engaging.
Because it's an aspirational lifestyle category, people will keep browsing. When they like something, they'll buy. Is that the general lens to it?
I mean, I think you are just more if you have an app, right, you are more likely to purchase and be more conscious and be more aware of what is happening with that brand rather than, otherwise.
Because what I've seen happen is a lot of people take a stab at getting apps out, but a lot of brands don't necessarily resonate extremely well to have an app. If I'm going to buy something from you once a year, I'm not going to keep an app on my phone. But if I'm constantly, I've seen people who have these H&Ms and Zara apps because there's going to be a new collection that you want to keep browsing. Every once in a while, you'll pick up something, save to your wish list, add to your cart, and then the downstream automated engagements will make you tempted to buy.
Yeah.
So in some sense, having the app on your phone is a certain mindshare you've already given to that brand.
Yeah.
And the constant reminders become a certain, let's say, affinity driver as well. So you chose to have an app at a certain point, and the intent there was to enable more frequent engagements, frequent touches.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think not just in terms of engagement, even in terms of conversions, our conversions on our apps are 3 to 4 times higher than on the website. Right.
And this would also be organic opens versus triggered opens, specific nudges. What could be the driver?
I mean, it is both, right? At the end of the day, we look at organic at a certain benchmark level. Okay, this is organic and this is the retention rate over apps. So, of course, apps have a much higher organic traction, of course. But, the contribution that our apps have on our overall portfolio is very, very significant.
I can imagine that.
Yeah, so which is where, the community building happens. And when we launched our app, investing in our own tech team was, I think, one of the biggest, it was a big success story for us, right? Moving from a shop,
right, for a D2C brand to end up having an own tech team. Most companies at this scale won't probably have that kind of scale of tech team.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it was just some good investors or some networks advise, I thank Pankaj, okay, this is great, right? Because,
it's not so universal advice because a lot of brands might not necessarily need one or be able to find similar value.
Absolutely. Like, when you look at like bigger players, even some of these audio brands who are doing 1500 crore or like 2000 crore revenue, they are all built on like a basic Shopify store. So
which is
that's
okay for
good,
their
which is
category.
okay for them because they have limited SKUs. But when you look at sort of, going deeper into the marketing funnel, personalizing, that is where Shopify, I feel, sort of becomes a challenge, right?
For the catalog size beyond a certain level and the kind of audience segment you want to deal with and the aspirational nature of your product, new collections coming in every month, you want to have a high touch with your consumers because they will engage more often and buy more often.
Absolutely. So that is where we developed our own tech team. And even the app we have is not a very basic app, right? It is very, very smooth, very fast with the nicest tech possible, the deepest algorithms in place, and like, a lot of iterations and development going on. So hats off to the tech team and Pankaj and Saurabh for that.
Having that choice made very clearly.
Because it was not easy, right? Like, I think we were on Magento back then, and to have everything move to a custom platform with like a new tech team, or like, developing this new project, building all sort of from data sets
luck
to
a little bit more often there because a lot of these projects end up falling apart.
Yeah, absolutely. And like of course, there have been multiple iterations of the app and it's much more stable. Like it's very, very stable now. But it was a great decision that was taken back then. And this is the time where it's sort of reaping the benefits.
Of course.
So a lot of D2C brands that, like I'm in touch with the founders and who don't have apps, I keep on telling them ki if you have like a fast moving product, right, it's even more so a reason that you need to sort of, have
trouble
these
with
apps.
That is somewhere or the other, the whole cost per install kind of mindset that you get into when you have apps. And this is still a top of the funnel play because that guy is yet to transact. Suddenly the economics of the business start to look different because you're driving a bunch of installs and then you have to convert these installs into activations. And before the guy is logged in, you don't even know if it's already your customer. What we've seen a lot of value, however, is in the app ecosystem to, let's say, only nudge people who are, let's say, second transaction level people to start moving towards the app instead of trying to put to in everyone. Because the economics of getting an app installed from this guy versus those guys are very different.
Absolutely. I completely agree to that. I think for us, it's not only sort of, having, a lifetime value angle, but it's also more about sort of building that community.
Sure.
And which is why...
Dig deeper into this whole community lens. What does this mean on your app? Because it's a commerce app, but you also have a layer of, let's say, conversation, content, lifestyle. What's happening?
Right. So I think it, the entire ecosystem has to have like a very common language, right? And that is defined by our brand values.
Sure.
So a lot of education happens through these apps, right? While you won't realize that this education is happening through, I mean, it's not always a push, product push kind of a thing, right? It is
education in the lifestyle category. Zoom into this a little bit for me.
Yeah, so education could be, say, we are launching a sustainability collection, right? Okay. So talking a little bit about that, we are talking about an artist. So who is that artist? What is that artist doing? Why is it relevant, right? So building into that.
So again, still a lot of broadcast content, as I would imagine. Of course, there's content, there's niches of content you could do. But when you say community, is this people discovering other people and having conversations who resonate all with the same brand philosophy?
So that is the broader intention.
That's the direction you want to move.
That's the direction that we are actually moving on, and we are looking at sort of working on our membership program, which won't be just pay and get free discount, but it will be a lot bigger than that. Sort of engaging. Like we keep on doing a lot of these activities in-house, right? It's just that we're not bringing structure and we're not necessarily...
What would the core glue bringing people together? I mean, of course, the segment you're dealing with has its own diverse preferences and style is one great thing. But what typically brings people together is causes, and you use sustainability as a lens.
So sustainability is one cause. I think design forwardness and bringing that utility out, right? Design is what we want to sort of focus on.
Okay, so if you were to host a party of, let's say, your top customers, what would glue them together will end up being how they think about design adding to their life.
Absolutely, right? Like randomly, a lot of times, customers end up coming to our office, right, just to pick up some product fast. So, I always make sure to take this opportunity to just hold their hand and bring them on for a 10-minute question answer session on how did they find us, where did they find us, what was it that actually appealed them. So in almost majority of the cases, it is the design, right? It's not just a random brand IP printed on a phone case, which they can buy from anywhere, right? But it's a certain style of art. It's a certain style of design, right? So how do you sort of, and people are more woke about these things, right? That we are buying things that represent certain things. So what is it that, they want to be represented by? Be it a certain palette of colors, right? That is what we, that is what is so unique to us.
Being a certain style. Is you speak about a woke audience which is having strong preferences about some of these things, while your brand name essentially is DailyObjects, which sounds, if I didn't know about the brand at all, It sounds very commodity. I mean,
Yeah.
if I were to think of daily objects, I think of daily objects as
Yeah.
very, very routine stuff.
Yeah.
So in some sense, and what's drawing people to you today, it
Yeah.
seems to be all the design aesthetic, all the user research, all the insights you brought in. But how does this translate into brand loyalty that anything daily objects does is now exciting for me?
Sure. So I think there are multiple touch points that a user experiences with a brand, right? And they could be starting from, how they experience the website UI, how they sort of have their buying journey, how they discover you on social media, what kind of campaigns you're doing, what kind of unboxing experience are you having, and say a social angle that you're having. So there are like tons of touch points. So we make sure
being
that
extremely conscious of how the brand comes across.
So at
across all of
each
these
and
touch
every
points.
touch point, I think there is a very deep level of insight put into it. Ki when the customer is opening the package, what is it that they're seeing first? What is the content that they are experiencing when they are going to our social media? Right? If say we have a campaign for a postcard collection, right? We recently did a collection which was sort of about cities and about postcards, right? So how do each of their campaigns sort of work? So tapping into the emotional angle of it, right? Why a certain city is a certain, arouses a certain feeling. What colors do cities represent? And all of that goes into the design process. So all of that connects the user to the brand, right? And these smaller emotional connects is what makes you, sort of feel, okay, I really like this brand, right? And that is where you sort of, become less about product push and more about story and emotions. And that is sort of building that community for us, right? So what do people like, right? What do they want to see? What do they want to experience, right? So it'll be a two-way thing, right? Like we share with the audience and the audience shares with us.
Yep.
What is it that they want?
So Pranil, we spoke extensively about the amount of user insights you're gathering from a whole bunch of different dimensions. I look at life in two lenses, right? The growth happens either via getting new customers in or selling more to current customers. And there's a ton of user insights coming your way from a lot of these Google Trends kind of spaces as well as from your own consumer data. How do you translate this into the insights that let you innovate on the product side of things?
Sure.
Help me understand this engine a little better.
Sure. So I think like a key part of the growth role, right, when I talk specifically about the growth team is the data, right? So on a daily, weekly, monthly level, we are continuously analyzing data, trying to find out patterns, right? Because it can get chaotic, working with so much data. So something as simple as, maybe, identifying colors that are working well, right? So for a collection that is launched, we'll know, okay, red is selling well, green is selling well. Why is it selling
it sounds pretty simple. Every single product that you have to upload has to have that attribute called color, which is not the case with a lot of brands.
No, so I think this again translates back to our tech stack as well, where we force our tech team and like literally bug them.
I want this 20 more data points.
Put this tag, put that thing.
And your cataloging team will also hit you for all the additional attributes you have to put on every single product, right?
So, I mean, I think when we developed the system out initially, I think it was challenging, but now it's fairly streamlined. So it's not really...
They like what comes out of it eventually.
So I think it's a fairly simple structure. It's just like uploading sheets, figuring out attributes. And I think it's a very easy tagging system.
So what surprised you in the last, let's say, couple of weeks?
So something recently happened just yesterday only, right? So day before yesterday. So, we have a X amount of sale every day. And out of nowhere on Sunday, we saw like almost a 40% spike in sales. Same ad spend, no changes on tech, no changes, no launches, anything, right? And like, similar thing happened last year as well. So we were shocked last year, we weren't this year, right? And it was mostly because we realized that, it's linked to these big billion and Amazon sales, and it was the last day on Sunday for one of these marketplaces. So while main tech products are getting sold, lifestyle accessories at our sort of, platform take that increment, right? So conversion rates increases and...
So people are buying phones there and then cases here, is it?
Exactly.
Wow.
So last year we were completely baffled and why is this happening? And then over the period of different sales, we sort of, somehow rationally and irrationally combined, we figured out that, this is the likely scene. This is a theory, right? This is a thesis, and like, let's test this out 2-3 other sales. And like, we would see that jump. So now we plan for it in advance. Okay, this is the sale. Stock up inventory, work on crazy offers and capitalize on that sort of
Make the most of it,
right?
by all means.
So
back to the engine and innovation on the product side of thing, and you spoke about 2 engines that were running for you. Let's get to that.
Sure. So I mean, like, when we talk about 2 engines, one is the cycle which gets initiated through data, and the other is which gets initiated with design. When we talk about data-led approaches, right? So there are a lot of insights that we understand by looking at not just the data, but also like our user feedback on comments, our reviews, and like all of that is being analyzed within the growth team itself, right? In conjunction with other teams as well. But the data part of it is mostly handled by the growth team. So for example, there is a certain X product, and we realize that people are randomly buying more of that product, right? Say watch bands, for example, right? People are buying 2 or 3 watch bands. Not like, there is a X percentage who are just buying one, but there is a overwhelmingly large percentage of people buying 3 or buying 2 or more than 3 as well, right? So what does that represent and why, right? So we dive deep into the whys, we do the heat mapping of the user journey, we speak to a lot of customers, and that is where we realize that, watch bands is essentially an accessory that you wear, match it with your outfit, match it with your attire, match it with your style, right? And you keep on changing this almost every day, right?
Wow,
So which is why, from a psychological perspective, a watch band is something that people are likelier to buy more, right? Say phone case you have, you may not necessarily change it every day, but you may change it, say, in a gestation period of a month. Bags, you may sort of carry it for even longer, but like, accessories, smaller accessories, you may want to, say, a small pouch or a fanny, you may want to sort of, purchase more of. So you sort of bundle these and create offers around that, where you sort of, work on maybe, say, lower margins but higher absolute order value. So this is what drives the traction, and like, this is just one example.
But this is very, logical, mathematical kind of driven outcome, right? Then there's this other side which you said is very design led. And I was kind of curious, when you scale at the pace at which you are, somewhere you can't run a democracy. You can't purely be dependent on data driven answers as well, because there's a design aesthetic, sense and judgment, and some of those are possibly bets.
Yeah.
And
100%.
somebody has to take that stance, right? So 100%. How do you make that happen in your world?
Sure. So I think, like, the most critical part about us being a design forward company is that, our hiring or like our team building also happens with that in mind, right? Like, almost 80% of our audience is, 80% of our employees are under like 27 years old. So this is a very heavy Gen Z and millennial sort of led
is
company.
Every one of them like a heavy customer to you as well in some sense? I'm assuming they get employee discounts.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think everyone has bought at least once or twice within the company.
Which is great, because your consumer research can pretty much happen out of office as well.
Yeah, and like some of our, like, core design people, are leading a lot of these freshers, like 21 years old, absolutely crazy Gen Zs, right? While it's very hard to manage some of them at times,
I can imagine.
because like it's I think 2 generations worth of gap, not just 1 generation worth of gap, right?
But is that a conscious choice design?
It is a conscious choice design. Yeah, it is a
Sorry,
conscious
I
choice
cut you in
design.
between.
No, that's fine. So while it's difficult to deal with them, I think, when you sort of rear these Gen Zs in a beautiful way and sort of give them their space, they have a lot of potential, right? They have a lot of ideas, and they are open to things that you wouldn't have thought of, right? Even as a millennial, you wouldn't have, like, you maybe X amount of creative, but like, they will think completely out of the box, and they may be exposed to a lot more cultures and pop culture, sort of influences than you wouldn't have even heard of, right?
It's quite intriguing that the target audience you deal with as a customer is populating half of your office. Which most brands are not able to do, because the people who are sitting in the boardroom and thinking are very different from the kind of market they're selling to.
No, this is what I feel drives the innovation factor, right? Because you can only search on Google so much, and you can only sort of look at trends on Instagram so much. You have to have a core part of your audience across different teams, right? So Gen Zs in marketing, Gen Zs in design, Gen Zs and Gen Z millennials in your tech team as well. So all of these creative fields, you need to have younger people who can sort of think outwards. And that is what has sort of paid off, right? So when it comes to the design process, while we have a very strong community of artists within the network that has been developed over the years, a lot of it is being like consistently brainstormed within the team, right? Like, people have specific opinions on why they feel this design would work, and this way of putting a design works, right? It's not just about pasting a design on a product just because we can. It's about the why of it, right? So innovation in that sense, innovation in the design, innovation in the kind of add-ons that we want to build, whether it's for an Apple ecosystem or in our bags, right? That is what we try to do, and like, it's a very healthy collaborative discussions. There is no discrimination done based on the age, because like, the folks that we are working together, they know their stuff, right? They surprisingly know their stuff, and they know it very well than maybe some experienced veterans in the industry as well.
Okay, so on the whole team side itself, right, in terms of the kind of functions, you pretty much have a fair representation from the gang. And I also heard that you do a lot of your content work in-house, pretty much all of your content in-house.
Yeah,
right?
Pretty much all of it is done in-house only. And I think a lot of thought goes into, how a new launch is going to happen, right? So when we talk about about a new launch. So there is user research, there's a market research, there is a material research, there is prototyping, sampling, and then the campaign, and then the storyline behind it, and then
So
it goes
prototyping,
live.
sampling, campaign. Just zoom into this a little bit, because
Yeah.
are we saying that this is going to get open to a limited audience first? We'll see the response and then we'll see
No,
if
so
it's scaling?
prototyping, when it means just internal development and internal
product.
prototyping, the product, and then based on the product, the campaigns happen, right? So all of this, while like it can be explained in 10 seconds, the actual work that goes behind it is like quite long,
Of course,
right?
quite
A lot of our collections, it has taken almost a couple of years to launch, just because finalizing the vendors. Say for example, our Pangea collection. There are literally one or two vendors who are producing this material within India, right?
Wow,
in the
okay.
quantities that we need. So figuring those out, figuring out the quality, fine-tuning things, getting our employees to sort of do a test run of the samples, use them. So all of that
But in
takes
some
time.
sense, then this kind of becomes a bit of a mandate and becomes a bigger bet as well. So you
Yeah.
have to come with a larger conviction to be able to make that kind of time and effort and money
Absolutely,
investment.
absolutely.
On the other side, you have a fairly interesting bunch of tactical possibilities that this is,
Yeah.
let's say, quick to roll out and we'll do
Yeah.
great business this season and we'll phase it
Yeah.
out next season.
Yeah.
So in some sense, the whole longevity of the collection that you're building, whatever's coming in versus whatever's going out, you
Yeah.
spoke about the fact that there's new stuff happening more frequently and the phasing out is slightly slower.
Yeah.
So your catalog continues to expand
Yeah.
at a certain length. But is this a lens of, let's say, experiment pilot with, let's say, a small group of TG and then take a larger batch, because it's also an inventory-led business in some sense.
Right.
And it's also going to be potentially a whole bunch of unsold inventory, which would be a nightmare to deal with subsequently. So how do you look at this lens of test and scale versus innovate and hope that it'll play out?
Sure. So I think for the smaller collections, say designer phone cases where we are collaborating with artists, it's a fairly faster process, right? We can sample quite fast, print quite fast, and test out quite fast. We don't even maintain even inventory management is quite sorted
Very
for
lean.
us. It's very lean for phone cases, so it's a fairly risk-free approach for us,
Sure.
right? Again, the second part of it on the design launches of the bigger collections, right? So as you mentioned, conviction is needed, right? So it's not like if we have spent 2 years on a collection, we can't afford to pirate it with a small person. It has to sort of go live in like a 99% probability. Of course, we won't put out something which is not looking nice. But the conviction essentially happens through the network of people that we are sort of surrounded with. Being a very design-led company, we are connected with a lot of designers, a lot of people in the industry, a lot of veterans, even within the team, right? Like the people are very, very design forward. So I think the opinions of multiple people, while design could be subjective, there is a very heavy conviction made on a specific collections, and the iteration process also goes through a lot of feedback, be it with other designers in the network, be it with investors, be it with employees,
Sure.
be it with the design team, right? So enough feedback gets taken.
The
And
one
enough
thing now,
use
with
cases.
all of this homework, there'll still be some stuff that'll bomb.
Yeah. I mean, something or the other always goes wrong, but I think,
No, I mean, product's not necessarily getting the kind of love that you expected, because at the end of the day, there is going to be a consumer who will behave in a fashion which you didn't anticipate. And I'm curious about this because I spoke to a large beauty brand, and they had a large batch of a certain kind of lipstick produced, which didn't work out very well. Now, either you write it off and you kind of destroy this inventory, or you somehow put it on an offer and sell it to whoever wants to buy as a first-time consumer. In your world, when stuff, let's say, doesn't necessarily respond in the same as planned, how do you deal with it?
So, being completely transparent, I think it has rarely happened. At least in the 2 years that I've
You can kind of manage small batches so it never gets to that point. You might not make it again,
Exactly.
but whatever
So-
you made is going to get over.
Yeah. Things have sold, right? Like there is not one collection that I could think of in, say, the designer goods which hasn't worked well. And designer goods is where a longer gestation period is entailed.
But there's also this lens of squeezing the most out of that collection before you kind of
Absolutely.
call it a day out the next batches.
So
right?
one is so one part of it is the hedging aspect of it that you spoke about, right? How do you hedge it? So
I like the CA talking.
Yeah. So the hedging essentially happens because we have like our in-house manufacturing facility, right? We have almost 250 people working in the same office space on on our payroll, and there are additional contract employees as well. So for the most part of it, our inventory is quite lean, and there is a lot of just-in-time inventory, right? And a lot of it is done by analyzing the demand patterns and the search spikes. So how we hedge is that we procure these raw materials and we'll make, say, 25, 30, whatever X amount of units
Sure.
of a specific SKU. If it doesn't sell, we'll push it out through some marketing tactics. And then if the entire collection is not doing well, which hasn't really happened as much with the bigger collections at least, with the same material, we'll innovate and design and make something new out of it.
Sure.
Right? Because material is quite lean and like
Yeah.
material research is good, and we have like a lot of flexibility to make more products out of the same
In-house
material.
manufacturing and 250 people is again a fair bit of commitment to the game, right? Because those are not things you can switch on, switch off easily. You can't expand capacity, reduce capacity suddenly either. So in some sense, puts a bit of a controlled growth charter there.
Yeah, absolutely.
But is that 100% of your manufacturing in-house?
So no, I mean, we have like a part of it outsourced to contract manufacturers as well. Yeah, but mostly like majority of it happens in-house, and of course, during peak seasons or like when there is a demand surge, we have like, I think it's by design that we are sort of working with these contract employees, contract manufacturers, so that when the demand spike happens, we can sort of give some of the bandwidth to that side to meet those demands.
What I'm very curious about now, Pranil, is being a growth guy, you've got tentacles across so many different parts of the business. How do you manage prioritization? How do you manage time allocation? How do you manage the team? How do you manage your numbers? How do you manage your dashboards? What's your lens to it?
Sure. So I think a lot of it, as I mentioned, is just like, firefighting and getting the daily things out of the place. I make sure that within my team, I encourage people to sort of, take at least a day in the week.
So what's your team like? What are the kind of people that are part of your org dedicated? Of course, you have tentacles across most places, but...
So dedicated team would be about 5-6 people, which has, performance people, marketing people, and then you have your growth and partnership people. Then you have someone who's a liaison between the operations and tech team. And then you have even across the bigger marketing team, you have someone who, 2 people who take care of the marketplaces angle of it.
What about the data gang? Where does it lie in the org?
So within the growth team itself.
Okay, within the growth team. And you have some engineering bandwidth as well available to do small optimizations?
Yeah, no, I mean, we have a full tech team. So
no, within the growth org, because I mean, I've seen that in consumer product companies, not necessarily in e-com, but in their world, there's so many little things that they keep wanting to do within the growth org that they don't want to become a ticket in the IT line. In your world, how does it work?
So, I mean, it's a fairly integrated and flat team, right? So, both tech and data team work together.
Sure.
So, there are a lot of elements which, the data cannot by themselves figure out through, say, an Excel or a Python. So, then we go to the data team, to the tech team, and they sort of write some basic codes and sort of help us out with our requirements. So, it's not really as formally structured that we have to go to someone, raise a request, and, follow that entire structure.
We're able to maintain that agility at current scale at least.
Absolutely. So that sort of helps us.
So you're talking about the 5 or 6 people growth on that side, and you have acquisition people, you have, let's say, the side on marketplaces as part of the org.
Yeah.
And then there is conversion. Somebody looks at this.
No, I think it's within the team.
Within the demand. And in terms of the whole retention lens of what kind of repeat rates are you getting, what kind of cohorts are working well, what's not working well, what interventions are needed. What's the org there? What do they do on a daily basis? How do they organize themselves?
So again, this is again a part of the performance and data team itself, right? So, it's about, say, every day what we are monitoring is the trends of the revenue, right? How hourly trends are moving, how hourly revenue is moving, category wise, say region wise, AOV wise, what are these metrics?
So there's any kind of spike or drop, you will want to get alerted and you want to
absolutely. It's very, very real time. It has to be that way. And like a lot of things get solved because of this, right? Looking at the hourly revenue, a lot of times you realize that, for example, say OTPs aren't working. So we know that something is wrong. So a lot of time, the tech folks have gotten a call at say 11 o'clock in the night, ki OTP is not working ASAP, right? So all of these things happen through real-time monitoring. So, there's dedicated people. There are dedicated people who are doing this on an hourly basis. And then, of course, there is deeper level of insights, which is on the data person, right? So every week we'll come up with, say, 10 problem statements. They could be any problem statement. Say, okay, how can we increase sale of phone cases? How can we look at removing excess SKUs?
These are like growth levers in some sense, which become tactical projects, and then they complete the loop and get into execution.
So a lot of these data problems, right? Like, I think it's about identifying a lot of problems. You don't know which one is necessarily the biggest, right? But once you sort of understand the data, patterns will automatically start to emerge, right? This is the beauty of a data person, that, data is there, but how do you make sense of that data? How do you sort of look at what is behind these numbers, right? Is it sort of representing something big? So a lot of times, say, the problem statement, for example, could be understand the buying pattern of someone who has purchased a bag first, right? What are they buying next, third time, fourth time, whatever, among the people who are repeat purchasing. And that is where, while, this data is analyzed, we'll realize that someone who's buying a bag is very highly likely to buy 3 watch bands. Random example, right?
Sure.
And then we know that we need to bundle a bag in a bundle.
Yeah.
Like this is not a real-time example,
I can
but just
imagine.
like for
But those are kind of insights typical
Yeah.
cross-sells would become much smarter because of this insight coming back.
Absolutely. And then say, for example, we'll try out, bundling 2 products based on this data, and that will hit off really well, which has actually happened, right?
Sure.
A lot of things, right? Say, for example, we were selling a power bank and a cable separately, and then we decided that while it's a wireless power bank, some people might want to charge it manually as well, and we started selling that bundle at an even higher price, and it is selling better than the normal bundle, right?
I can imagine.
So
in some sense, there's a ton of compounding at play as well, because these are incremental, let's say, things that you will do every day, which will eventually add up to like a lot of improvement overall.
Absolutely. It has to be that way. And one of our co-founders says that, if you must fail fast. Right. So that is what we keep on trying to do, that, we have to try out 10 things. We know that probably 8 are not going to work, but 2 can potentially take a very exponential scale. Right?
So in some sense, the person or the team or the set of people who design these experiments will pretty much be the key drivers of growth. That you will try these 10 different things in terms of possibly these bundle combinations, these pricing strategies, these discounting strategies. I don't know, give me a few examples of some of these other growth experiments you do, so bundling I heard. What else?
So, for example, we, specific to the retention part of it, we launched a SaaS platform which is doing reward points, right? So the burn and earn model. So while it sort of works mostly for fintech players, we thought we'll also try it out and see how it works. And it's been contributing a very significant portion of our revenue.
So people who spend more with you get more points, and they can burn these points within the platform or outside?
Within the platform.
Within
It's a closed loop.
That's clear. It's a closed loop.
It's a closed loop.
Okay. And you've seen merit in...
Significant
But that would
merit.
typically happen in a category which is somewhere a commodity, and I have to choose between, let's say, Amazon and Flipkart, and I'll choose Amazon because I'm a Prime member.
Yeah.
But in your world, how does it kind of...
So I think, while say I would have bought an X product, right? I won't buy that same product again or like a similar product again, but the ecosystem is big that DO develops, right? So the intent to buy more is already established.
Okay.
It's just about the subtler nudges to the customer, okay, this is also an offer, this is also a reward, and this is also motivation.
Put money in your wallet after your first transaction to make your second transaction. That works well to bring people back in some sense. And since you have the app, that real-time score of these points are there and they'll potentially expire unless you consume them, will end up bringing people back.
You create that sense of urgency, like these boilerplate marketing techniques, and those work really well.
That works out in your world.
You think of a bigger strategy, and then you use these conventional or tried and tested theories with the right communication and content. Of course, I think that is the most critical. You have to be subtle about your push. You can't be very aggressive all the time, and I think that plays off.
Tell me something about the segmentation lens in your world, because there's a ton of different consumer types or personas or psyches who are coming into your world. You told me that the lens on product categories in terms of preference is fairly neutral. You have agnostic bunch people coming in from the first transaction lens. But beyond that, from the first transaction to the second transaction, is there a pattern that you see emerging that, okay, this is where the users are headed more, or this is what we're able to squeeze more juice out of? Let's say this customers tend to be more valuable to us than this bunch.
So, for example, say we are doing an annual sale, right? Just timing it with these marketplaces sale. We also had a sale very recently around the festive campaign.
Sure.
So there are different sort of segmentations that happen, right? One is on the existing user base, where we sort of tell them, okay, these are the offers that are going on, and this is the extra value add. Like, we know what they have purchased, so what are they likelier to purchase is what we target. And for example, iPhone 15 launch happened. So we know someone who has maybe purchased a 12 or a 13 is likelier to move to a 15 than someone who has purchased a 14. So we'll focus more on the 12 and 13. People who have bought a wireless charger, for example, are likelier to buy or be inclined towards the iPhone 15.
So this now becomes a bit of a segmentation play, that pick up this cohort and send them this, because the likelihood of conversion is amazing.
So this is just an example, right? Based on certain logic. There is some bit of intuitive logic, and there is some bit of data which also tells us, right, ki phone cases do see a spike when the Apple keynote happens, right, or when Apple new launches happen, right? So when phone cases take a peak, then there are certain ecosystem related products which also take a peak, which is cables, accessories, wireless chargers, right? And they're bound to take a peak. So now do we sort of, and this flows across directions. So if we know that a phone case is going to launch, phones will see a spike, right? Phones will see a spike, cases will see a spike, wireless will see a spike. What can we do on a product development? So we are launching a phone sling collection just for phone cases, which are again made with really good colors. It's still not launched yet, but this is where that insight comes from.
That's completing the loops, which is fairly fascinating, because in the fashion industry as well as some of the accessory industries, this loop completion of picking up an insight, translating into the product, taking it to market becomes a very valuable piece of how businesses grow.
Absolutely.
But just to stay back on the whole lens on communication on the user side, and you spoke about a couple of very interesting segmentation lenses, and I'm sure you would have heard of those target case studies where somebody was buying, let's say, a pregnancy material today will potentially buy diapers tomorrow.
Absolutely.
So what I found your example is very fascinating was somebody who's bought an iPhone 12 or 13, likely to upgrade to 15. And that's when it becomes really interesting because, I've seen examples of, let's say, fashion ecosystem where shoes or apparel was a category and there's a sale on a specific size because most of these categories have that cut size issue. You left with size 7 shoes or you left with size 14 shoes, which are not mainstream. But if you want to send this sale to everybody, it won't make sense. It'll make a lot of sense if you send it to specific people who've either bought or filtered that size before. So the lens I was trying to apply was, when you looked at a couple of transaction examples of an iPhone of a certain vintage or a product in a certain category, and that gives you that lever to say that, okay, if I'm going to communicate this to these guys, the conversion rate is 20x of what it would be for a normal blast.
Absolutely.
And that's where the first party communication that goes out to consumers from any of your channels, email, WhatsApp, SMS, push, the quality of conversions is, in our understanding, very directly proportional to the level of relevance. And relevance happens by
100%.
Segmentation and personalization.
100%.
So I was very curious to understand in your world, given that there are known patterns and there are sometimes patterns to be discovered, how do you make it happen? And to what level of sophistication or maturity do you currently look at this, and where is it headed from there?
No, I think there's a quite deep bit of a sophistication involved, right? So this was just like one example on the iPhone cases, right? Which is a very straightforward,
fairly intuitive,
very intuitive, very straightforward, right? So there are patterns around past AOVs of customers, right? Past spendings, right? People who have purchased, say, worth under 1,000, right, are not likely to be pushed products which are 5,000. They'll be, moved to the next year, say 2,000 or 2,500. And how do you do that? Do you give them more offers? Do you give them, say, freebies along with their orders to push them towards 2,000, right? Do you give them extra discounts? Someone who's at a 2,000, do you push them, say, 5 smaller products, or do you push them which are in a different ecosystem? Maybe a bags person is not interested in a tech product. So do you split test those things also? And a lot of it is based on our past learnings. These are journeys which we know are going to work, and then a fair bit of budget is spent on split testing, right? We may think this is making logical sense, but data proves otherwise, right? So it is very data-led. So a lot of these things also keep on happening, whether they are based out of the amount of money someone has spent, money and region spent, right? Is it tier 1 high spend or is it tier 4 high spend, right? Tier 4 high spend is more aspirational, so there would be a different product which would be pushed to them. A tier 1, maybe a tier 1, premium, someone who has purchased, say, 1,000 can also have the capacity to purchase a 4,000 worth product in the next purchase also. So, right. So those are things which
now starts to become very interesting for me is you have a 5 or 6 people team and you have hundreds of these things that you could potentially do. How does it work out practically?
So I think practically every week we come up with 10 problem statements, right? There are certain consistent problem statements ki haan, theek hai, overall sale kaise badhani, right? So that is the question one.
Chart number 1.
And then it flows down to priority, right? So there is a fairly intuitive sense, or intuitive, but there is a decent sense of prioritization between the founders and the other team leads, that this is likely to get us the maximum results. So first focus is here, second focus is here, third focus is here, right? So across all of these tiers of prioritizations, there are data problems and there are qualitative aspects. So there are a lot of analysis that goes. Some things get skipped out, some things get higher priority, but it's a lot of hard work that goes into identifying these problem statements. And then a bit of luck in which one of these 10 problems sort of ends up giving us meaningful insight.
So one of the things we've seen people do in our world is our most sophisticated user at WebEngage will end up having some 500 odd journeys running on the platform. Now what tends to happen is you discover a problem statement, you figure a automated loop sorts, pick up this audience, do something with them, complete, and you look at the journey outcome in terms of control group delta. Is this delivering outcomes? And you keep setting up 10 new journeys every week while the previous was also running. So you also make sure that it's not overlapping, people don't get 5 different messages. But at the end of, let's say, a 6-month period, you have hundreds of them running. And they're all delivering some incremental value. And that's the compounding lens to it. So I'm curious when you say that these new problem statements get solved, and is this something that's constantly adding up to your automation stack?
Not
or some of this is more tactical in nature, which is one time and then you'll have to think of something else tomorrow?
So I think it's not incrementally increasing our automated journeys. We like to keep things simple and clean,
Sure.
at least from a consumer experience point of view.
Hmm.
So when we talk about practical refreshes, they happen say once in every 2 months,
Sure.
1 month, 1 to 3 months, right?
Hmm.
That is when the communications and the creatives and content and journey flows get refreshed. Unless our data has identified a massive gap that we completely missed out, which doesn't happen too often.
Sure,
It
of
happens every
course.
now and then, but not
I mean,
too
that's where the
often.
whole compounding lens of incremental pieces come in. But
Yeah.
I can imagine there's so much happening, and you're
Yeah.
seeing the kind of growth you're seeing where all of this is adding up
Yeah.
meaningfully already.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, well, Pranil, anything that you think is the most exciting thing to happen in the next quarter in your world?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think at a startup, like tons of things are happening. Excited. We are doing a lot of crazy brand collaborations with a couple of really big folks. So those new collections will be quite out there and quite nice. So I think that's quite exciting. And I think one of the biggest pieces that we are doing is we are launching our first offline store in DLF
Wow.
Cyber Hub. So it will be quite nice and capturing the entire festive movement in the Q3, Q4. So from November till almost January, February is what we are planning. And with our audience being mass premium and being around the corporate hub, I think couldn't have had a better location and a better time.
Because at the end of the day, India is still an offline heavy market for
Yeah.
pretty much all categories. And
Yeah.
in this case, if it's slightly experiential in nature, because some of
Yeah.
these people will want to try, put them on,
Yep.
whatever.
Yep.
It's great from an experiential lens.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So India has an amazing appetite for high quality and signature products like yours, which
Yeah.
are very, let's say, accessible, if I
Yeah.
were to use that word. Super. All the best with your journey. Thank you so much for doing this, Pranil.
Thank
Very
you.
exciting conversation.
Absolutely lovely being here.